brings healing to me. The whisper of your voice is peace when the storms come and I'm feeling alone. Father, keep me from harm. Your love brings healing to me. The whisper of your voice is peace when the storms come and I'm feeling alone. Father, keep me from harm. You are the strength, you have the power, Jesus the rock. You are the strength, you have the power, Jesus the rock. The strength, you have the power, Jesus the rock. You are the strength, you have the power, Jesus the rock. You are the strength, you have the power, Jesus the rock. You are the strength, you have the power, Jesus the rock. You are my rock. Ooh, you are my rock.
And it refreshes my heart. Turn to Luke chapter 23. As we continue our series, What to Do with Jesus, and today we want to talk about discovering how Jesus dealt with a bad day. You ever had a bad day? A few of us. Jesus teaches us so much about life, what attitudes to display and how to handle different situations in our lives. I think often the picture we have of Jesus is somewhat unrealistic, in that we don't really think that Jesus had bad days. And if you're not one of those kind of people, I want you to know that there are those kind of people. This is the point I would like for all of us to ponder and think about. Why wouldn't we want to think about Jesus having a bad day? Think about that. Why wouldn't we want to think about that? The reason why I wanted to make this point is simply because I believe this is exactly where the disciples were. On the night that they had the Last Supper, Jesus was telling them in very plain language, hey, I'm going to have a bad day tomorrow. And you know what their attitude was? I don't think so. And he was telling them in all sorts of ways. As a matter of fact, at one point, he tells Peter, now this happens earlier, he says, it needs be, he actually tells all 12 of them, needs be that I go to Jerusalem and there I will suffer many things. And Peter takes him aside and goes, I don't think so. I got in this organization because we were going somewhere and suffering was not a part of the plan. Or you having a bad day. And I don't like that. And you know what the Lord's response to that was, get thee behind me, Satan. For your intentions are not on the intentions of God. And I want you to know that this is going to be really start out as a really good day. And maybe there's a dynamic in that you and I need to learn about. Is that how many times a good day starts out and then it turns sour? Something goes wrong during the day. And Jesus is going to experience a parade in his honor. As a matter of fact, I read one statistic, and I'm very hesitant to even tell you what it was, but they said that there were lots of people that came to Jerusalem at that time that were actually celebrating the Feast of the Passover. And there were hundreds of thousands of people that actually watched Jesus in this parade. A really high time. But that is not what that week is known about, is it? That week, when we think about the Passion Week, we think about the sufferings that Jesus went through. And so as he's going through these particular sufferings here, he is telling his disciples, I want you to understand that this is really going to be a tough day. And the thing that I love about Jesus is that as he begins to explain it to us, he's not only going to explain it to us, but he's also going to model it for us. And so when we look in the context of what Jesus is going to do here, he is going to say to these guys, I'm going to show you some things that you can do when your bad day comes around. Now, friends, let me tell you what I really believe happens to every one of us. We have this little thing that goes off in the inside of us that's kind of a discerner. It kind of works like a radar. And we send out little messages to people, and we discern whether they're having a good day or a bad day. And when they're having a bad day, guess who we gravitate towards? The people that are having a good day. We don't like to hang around depressed people. We don't want to be around people that are really having a bad day. And this is the point that I want to make, is that when we are going through a bad day or somebody else is going through a bad day, there seems to be something that is around them that really doesn't attract a whole lot of friends that really want to deal with that. This is exactly what was happening to the disciples. They were sensing Jesus was going to have a bad day, and they were going to run. Now, there's a scripture that says this, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will scatter. And I started to meditate on that. Why in the world would people scatter from the very one that they loved? And Jesus even pronounces this in advance. And I think it's this natural response that you and I have to bad days or bad days that other people are going through, that we just don't want to be around it. And then there's a dynamic that I have found to be very, very true. And it goes something like this. God does a lot more in my heart during the bad days than he does during the good days. There is something that goes on when God is really speaking to us about, and it seems to be around those hard days. And friends, here's something that I want you to contemplate about. I think it's during those hard days that you and I actually get to the place that we let God in that deep to how bad we've been hurt or the pain that we might be going through. And it's at no other time that we actually do that. As a matter of fact, I found a scripture that says this, Proverbs 20:30. Blows and wounds cleanse away evil, and beatings purge the inmost being. Now, how many messages have you heard on that one? See, nobody likes to even talk about this stuff, and yet Jesus is saying in a very prophetic way, guys, I'm going to go through a bad day tomorrow. And let me just register this in your mind. It is my guess that this year, and there's not that many days, you're going to have a bad day. And you and I need to recognize that Jesus went through a bad day, and he modeled for us how to deal with bad days. Have I got your attention? Okay. Luke chapter 23, verse 26. And as they led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. And a large number of people followed him, including women, who mourned and wailed for him. And Jesus turned and said to them, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, Blessed are the barren women and the wombs that never bore and breasts that never nursed. Then there's a ring in this. I don't know where John is or whatever, but there's a terrible ring in this. They will say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? And 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with them to be executed. And when they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him along with the criminals. And on his right and the other one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. And the people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. And they said, he saved others, let him save himself. If he is the Christ of God, the chosen one. And the soldiers also came up and mocked him, and they offered him wine and vinegar and said, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. And there was written a notice above him which read, this is the king of the Jews. And one of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him, and aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us. But the other criminal rebuked him. Don't you fear God, he said, since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said to Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus answered him, I tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise. It was now about the 6th hour, and darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. For the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. And Jesus called out with a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. When he had said this, he breathed his last. If you have your little outlines, you want to follow along, let's take a look at 5 ways Christ wants us to respond to a bad day. 5 ways Christ wants us to respond to a bad day. Number 1 is this: prepare ahead of those inevitable bad days. Prepare ahead for those inevitable bad days. Verse 28. And Jesus turned to them and said, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. Now, here's what Jesus is doing. Jesus is making quite a statement here. He's basically saying this. As a matter of fact, when I was thinking about this and meditating on it and looking at it, you kind of think that Jesus is being a little bit abrupt. I mean, these people are there weeping for him, and he goes, wait a minute. Now, you see, what you always have to look at when you look at the Lord, when he's speaking to people, is that, first of all, his motive is always love. So he's not trying to rebuke these people. He's just trying to get a point across. And this is what he's saying. Look at, guys, I've prepared for this day. I want you to know I've prepared for this day. I knew it was coming. You see? Now, a few weeks ago, I talked to you about the cringe factor. I want to tell you about something that I cringe at when I hear Christians talk. And here's how it usually begins to happen, is that since I have come to the Lord, my life is going so well. And you know, it is. And God does a redemptive lift, and there's mighty things that are taking place in people's lives, and it's going along so well. And then I just begin to cringe because there's a theology that has been placed in their mind from somewhere that says, and this is the way my life will go consistently. And that is not true, friends. It will not go that way. I am promising you there are going to be bad days. As a matter of fact, Jesus says that to these people, to these ladies, prophetically, there's a day coming in your life, not too far in the distant future, that you're going to realize that you wish that you would have never had children because you're having a bad day. You're going to have a really bad day. And I want you to think about that. As a matter of fact, here's what Jesus is saying. I want you to take opportunity of the bad day that I'm having now to prepare yourself for the bad day that is coming in your life. Not very many amens here. And you all know that exactly what I'm saying is true. Is Jesus had settled the issue. And now here, let's put it right down on the floor where we all live, and you know, where the rubber meets the road, and it goes something like this. When we see somebody having a bad day, let's say for instance they lose their job. Let's say for instance they go bankrupt. Let's say for instance their marriage goes in the toilet. Let's say for instance that their business goes down or whatever it is. We don't want to hang around that. And I'll just say something to you prophetically, friends, and it goes something like this. Lots of times you will be drawn towards people that are going through something so that you can show compassion on them. But God is also reminding you at that particular time, hey, listen, there's a day coming in your life. And now it's time to prepare. Put yourself in their shoes and say, how would I react? See, and I have this kind of theory that goes along like something like this. And I know that we talked about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane here not too long ago. But I think that Jesus looked at people going through crucifixion. And he began to prepare himself for that day. And I just want you to know that one of the ways that you deal with a bad day is you prepare for it. Not every day is going to be smooth sailing. Well, I said I've got your attention. Number 2, you'll find this one. Extend forgiveness to others during tough times. Verse 34, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Remember, the main reason that Jesus is on the cross is for one word and one purpose only. You want to hear it? People. He's having a bad day because of people. Now, I want you to think about this, friends. I mean, we always ask the question, well, who put him on the cross? Was it the Romans? Was it the Jews? Was it sinners? And I would just like to say, people. People put him on the cross. And the way that Jesus dealt with a bad day is he dealt with it through forgiveness. Now, the same thing that gave Jesus a bad day, friends, in most of the context of what you and I live in, is the same thing that gives us a bad day. And you know what that is? People. And you know what it is lots of times? It is just simply because we live on a broken planet with broken people. And by the way, you are broken too. And whether it is intentional or whether it is unintentional, you and I get hurt. And when we get hurt, we have one or two choices. We can either forgive or become bitter. I love the simplicity of the Lord. And when it comes around to forgiveness, he just says, forgive your brother from your heart. And then he doesn't make any kind of qualifications to that. He doesn't say, except for, and with these exceptions, you don't have to. He just simply says, when you've been offended, forgive. You know, forgiveness can be defined by a relaxed claim. Somebody has hurt you. That's right. And Jesus says, now I want you to forgive that person. Now, understand this. Forgiveness is not a one-time shot, friends. It's an ongoing process. And the way that you get through a bad day, and really it's really important for us to understand this, is that the way that you get through a bad day is not just forgiving them once. And by the way, it's really important that if that person doesn't know that they offended you, that you don't go up to them and say, I forgive you for, because they don't have a clue. Remember this, forgiveness is for you. Forgiveness is for you. 2 Chronicles 7:14 says this, if my people which are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I, speaking of God, will hear from heaven, now notice this, and forgive their sins, and then notice this, and heal their land. Because behind forgiveness comes healing. And the way that you and I deal with a bad day in our lives, friends, is that we learn how to forgive. Now, most of us in here are Christians and walked with the Lord, and if you haven't, we want you to do that. But for one reason or another, the church thinks that we're immune to being hurt. And we're not. And God calls us to walk in forgiveness towards one another. And it doesn't matter what the person has done to you. God just says, forgive. Forgive. And it shall be forgiven you. As a matter of fact, you know what happens to us when we don't forgive, friends? We put pressure upon God because then God can't exercise forgiveness towards us. And that's all he's about. As a matter of fact, two things that I've learned about God that you can just take to the bank. Number one is this. If you want to become more like God, you're going to become more giving. And second of all, you're going to become more forgiving. because God is a God that forgives. And so if we're going to get through a bad day, we got to learn how to forgive. Number 3 is this. Refuse to allow your heart to grow small. Smallness of heart. Refuse to allow your heart to grow small. Verse 43. And Jesus answered him, and I tell you the truth. Now this is Jesus on the cross speaking to the one thief. Today you will be with me in paradise. When Jesus was experiencing a bad day, he didn't withdraw from people and hide himself in a shell of self-pity. Bad day. Now, let me tell you what my tendencies are, friend. When I'm having a bad day, and I can blame this on my being an introvert, but I want you to know it is not good. It is not healthy. I can just hibernate and go into a hole and be by myself. And actually, you know what that is? It is actually self-pity asking for people to pay attention to me. And the last thing that anybody that wants to do when you're really going through a bad day is to show somebody else mercy because you want the attention to be on you. You see? And Jesus, for one other, he just challenges me to the very core of my being. I mean, here he is, and you talk about unchurched people and enlarging your heart, and that he came here to seek and to save that which is lost. I mean, his heart is as big on the day that he dies as the day that he came to this planet. You know, and people in this church, sometimes they'll just say, you know, the church is getting too big, and I'm just going, you know, it's not big enough for me. I want my heart just to continue to grow and grow and grow. And let me tell you what the tendency is, friend. You can go down one or two paths in your life, and here's how it is. Your heart can shrivel up in coldness. And let me tell you how that happens. Tell you exactly how that happens. You walk, as a matter of fact, let me just really narrow it down for you. This happens in my profession way too often. And you know what happens to people is they go out with a good heart and they start out, and then they find out, you know, that sometimes people in the church don't play real nice. And they get shot and they get hurt and they get wounded. And I don't mean literally shot like Ronnie would, but just a joke. But it's kind of that night, isn't it? And you get, and what you do is you find out over a period of time that your heart is shriveled up. And it's not warm, and it's not big. And I really had this thought that just really came across my mind, and I know that Paul shared it too. And it was this, you know, when we die and we go into the presence of the Lord, you know, you and I need to think just about this. What are we going to see first? We're going to see Jesus. And you know what Jesus is? He's a finisher. It is finished. And he left this planet with his heart bigger than when it started. And I don't want to end up someday with my heart all shriveled up, sitting over here in the corner as the founding pastor or whatever, and slobbering, and not knowing what's going on. I want to leave this place with my heart big towards what God's doing. And let me tell you what the tendency is in every one of our lives when we're going through a bad day. It's to withdraw. It's to withdraw. And God says, you know, friends, you know, going right back to what I was saying at the very beginning of this is that it seems to me that when I'm going through a bad day is the days that God does more in my life than any other day. And I don't really appreciate that, but that's the way that it happens. But here's what's going on, is that I think, you know, when you exercise physically, and you start exercising, and let's say you've taken a break, and now you get back out and you start exercising again, you know what comes to my mind anyway, and probably yours too? Pain. Why did I stop? You see? And yet it's during those moments of pain, it's in those moments of stretching, it's in those moments of whatever we are going through when we're having a bad day, that actually, friends, that's when we grow. You see? Don't allow your heart. Jesus looked at him and just says, man, yeah, you can come into my kingdom. His heart enlarged. It didn't get smaller as he grew older. and came to the last. Number 4 is this. Begin to contemplate your own mortality plan. Verse 46. I just love how quiet it gets in here at times. Jesus called out with a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And when he had said this, he breathed his last. Jesus, more than any other human being, understood this reality that everyone must face death. Everyone must face it. As a pastor, I get to observe people in their low moments and in their high moments. And through the years, you just hear enough things that you kind of come to a conclusion as to what people think. And here's something that I've noticed about people that don't want to admit that there's going to be a bad day. And you know how it comes out? I don't deal with death very well. I just don't go to funerals. And depending on my compassion level and the sensitivity that I feel at the moment, whether it's under my breath or whether I actually speak it out, I will say these words, someday you will. Someday you will. And I'm thinking about this, what Jesus says to his dad. Into your hands I commit my spirit. He knew where his spirit was going on the bad day. Now, I want to talk to you about death for just a minute. Death is this unnatural thing that takes place. Did you know that every one of us were created immortal? So when death comes around, the most unnatural thing on the planet is to have something that is broken away from you that you love. A few years ago, you know that my father passed away. And it was one of the most bittersweet experiences that I've ever had, was to be in the room when he died. I want to tell you why it's bitter. Number one is this. And friends, you and I have to be so careful as Christians. I want you to know this. Death is always an enemy. It's taken something away from us that God never intended to take away from us. But because of the consequences of sin, this thing has come into our life, and now people that we love, are going on, and there's something that's in me that just says to Christians sometimes, get real. This is a bad day. This is not a good day. Now, the sweet part of this is, and this is where I have a tough time sharing this, but I'm sure I'll get through it. The sweet part of this is that I got to spend a lot of time with my dad before he died. And you know what the sweet part of it was? I know where I'm going. And this is not the final chapter. As a matter of fact, when I do a funeral, and very few times do I ever forget this, I point at the person in the casket and I go, this is not the final chapter. This is not it. You see? And Jesus is saying, now, I want you to get a hold of this, friends, because this is how we deal with a bad day. Jesus is saying, and it's going to be a bad day for some of us during that day. And Jesus is saying to all those followers that are around that are listening. As a matter of fact, right after this, the centurion says, man, this guy must have been a righteous dude. Not exactly like that, but pretty close. And he says, because I've never seen anybody die like this. And what he is saying, I commit my spirit into your hands because I know where I'm going. You see? And here's the funny thing about this, friends. You and I will spend a lot of money and a lot of time taking care of our family, knowing that they're going to be taken care of financially and whatever else thing. But one of the things that just haunts people is this. Where did my loved one go? Where did he go? Or where did she go? And it's one of those wonderful things when those accounts have been settled and people around your family or around you during those moments, you can say, hey, I know where I'm going. And the peace that comes over a situation. Point number 5 is this. Consider the impact of eternity without God. Now this is Matthew 27:46. And all of us could repeat it. My God, why have you forsaken me? I know I said this a few weeks ago. And I got some emails and some people that were talking to me about what it meant. And this is something that I really believe. I believe that it's the first time in the history of all of the eons of time, all the history of time, that Jesus ever experienced being without his Father. Now, I think this is something that he contemplated, but I don't think he ever understood to the degree of what it was going to be like to be separated from God. And that is the penalty of sin. What is the penalty of sin? Being separated from God. And here's the point that I really want you to think about this evening is this. Jesus. And guys, I prayed all afternoon about the grace to say this. To say it in such a way that it really had the full impact of what I felt like the Lord was trying to communicate to me is this. Jesus, who created heaven and then this place called eternal separation from God, which, by the way, it was created for the devil and his angels. Just a point to ponder here. And Jesus created this, and now he's on the cross, and he thinks, my God, why have you forsaken me? And you know why he says that? One word will describe it all. And this is the guy that created it. It's because it was horrifying. See, you talk about unchurched. I mean, friends, you talk about the biggest game in town. It's being played right here, right now. Because you're going to spend eternity somewhere. See, I was in a high school classroom one time, and this was years ago, and got into a discussion with some kids, and it was really a good discussion. I'll never forget, this young man just asked me, how could a loving God ever send anybody to hell? You know, and it was one of those situations where, you know, boy, sometimes you just call upon God and say, God, there's got to be an answer. And if it's not the right one, then we're both going to be in trouble. Mostly me. And I just said, you know, the way that I understand it is that God doesn't send anyone to hell. People choose to go there. Now think about this. If God allowed people to come to heaven that didn't love him, then heaven would actually be hell for them. Because they don't want to be around God. And see, for us to understand this, to really get a hold of it, guys, goes something like this. And I know that we're talking about having a bad day, and I'm going to bring it to a conclusion here in just a moment. But the idea of it is that God doesn't want to separate from man. Man wants to separate from God. And so God says, I'll give you a place that you can go to. It's not what I want for you. And here's the final thought that I really want you to think about is this. When you're contemplating a bad day, I want you to think about eternity. Because when you make a comparison about the bad day that you're having now and make about the comparison with a bad eternity, there is no comparison. There is none. And Jesus sets a model for us. He knows that he's coming back from hell, but he is saying, guys, you don't want to go there. You don't want to go that way. And here's the perspective, and worship team, you can come on up. Here's the perspective that I think that all of us need to perceive is this. When you are going through a bad day, God wants to give you a new perspective. A new perspective. As a matter of fact, you can all stand with me. The two things that I felt like the Lord was saying to me about this particular sermon tonight was this. Number one is this. I want to give people a new perspective about bad days when they have it, that I'm actually going to do something in their bad days. And then second of all, and this was just one of those ones that was just clear out of the blue that I hadn't thought about or anything else, which I always try to indicate must be the Spirit of God, and that is this. Some of you are walking in fear of bad days. And you think along lines like, what if I'm diagnosed with? What if something happens to my kid? What if something happens to my job? What if something happens to my family? What if something, and it just goes on, and it's like a plague. And so I think what the Holy Spirit wants us to do is this tonight, friends, is just open up and saying, God, look, you're sovereign. You're in control. And I know that if you got Jesus through a bad day, you're going to get me through a bad day. Let's worship the Lord together, and I'll come back and pray with you.
You dance, oh